Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, Parler, and Instagram. And of course, be sure to visit www.mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
Nothing's like a rock show, man.
It's a place of solidarity.
Your average American isn't seeing the heavy rock artists on the award shows or radio. They can sometimes believe that, rock doesn't exist anymore in the way it used to.
I don't want to be on morning talk shows having to be nice because hard rock's all accepted and it looks good for Kathy Lee and Hoda.
Generally speaking, rock is dead.
I don't listen to anybody who says rock is dead.
All the disenfranchised feel that they belong to something that's much bigger than themselves.
I'm a whole different person when I'm at one of these concerts. You can de-stress your life and just be in the moment.
That symbiotic relationship between the fan and the band, it's integral. It's a cool vibe between the bands. It's like a big family.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 332. Releasing on March 12 is Long Live Rock, a documentary that delves into the culture of the hard rock heavy metal scene with emphasis on the communion and chaos of the hard rock festival. Told with intricate detail and featuring some of the biggest hard rock and metal acts of all time, from Metallica to Rob Zombie, Long Live Rock also explores the passion that drives the rock fan and the humanity behind the rock star. Joining me now on the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast are two creative forces behind Long Live Rock, director and producer Jonathan McHugh and producer Gary Spivack. Gary and Jonathan, I thank you both very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Thank you. Right.
So, Jonathan, 3.5 years in the making this documentary is, and it's also your directorial debut. What is it about this music, this community of fans that really inspired you not only to keep going at it, dedicate your time to getting this story out there, but also to get behind the lens as a director on this film as well?
Look, I produced a number of films, and I always wanted to direct something. And I started this film before this about the cosplay culture, and I was kind of in this subculture headspace. And then Gary's an old friend of mine. We worked together for Elektra with, breaking bands like Metallica and Motley Crue back in the day. So we kind of grew up always rocking. And when I mentioned to Gary, we went to one of his festivals. I think Eminem was headlining, and I took note of the passion of the fans, and very different than other festivals I would go to, whether it be Bonnaroo or Outside Lands or even Coachella to some extent. Gary's festivals were different. The hard rock aesthetic was very different. So I said, Gary, what about we do something about the fandom of the festivals? And we kind of put it on the back burner. And then one day Gary calls me. He goes, man, I can't tell anybody this, but we just booked Metallica for our 10th anniversary. And I said, yeah. And he goes, remember that idea you had? I was like, uh-huh. He said, well, why don't we do that? I go, well, okay, what does that mean? Like, how are we supposed to do that? And he's like, come on, man, you're a filmmaker, figure it out. So I called my cinematographer and I said, hey, you like rock, right? He goes, yeah. I go, you ever heard of Gojira? He goes, that's my favorite band. How about Metallica? I started reading the lists. And so I'm like, all right, well, I need you to volunteer for the mission. I'll pay for your plane ticket, and Gary will take care of us on the ground there. And Gary knew some crew members from a shoot he had done out in Columbus. And we picked up a crew, and off we went to build the sizzle reel. And then that had so much color and interesting stuff to it. And Gary introduced me to great fans. And we put together a sizzle reel, and we raised money off that sizzle reel. We just kind of kept shooting.
Gary, the beginning of the movie talks about how rock is dead. And there's a quote now popularly attributed to Gene Simmons of Kiss, of all people, speaking about how rock is dead, supposedly. You work as a promoter of hard rock festivals. You've watched hundreds of thousands screaming rock fans at any given moment just go batshit crazy over, their favorite metal act. When you hear something like rock is dead, how much does that motivate you to take part of a project like this to make sure that you can show that that is not the case at all?
Yeah, I love that one of the first lines in the film. If there's 100,000 people in the middle of Ohio and Metallica's headlining, it's safe to say that rock is not dead. It's not dead, and it's far from it. And it may not have the headline on USA Today or be the Grammy Award winner for Best Album of the Year in a competition with Taylor Swift and Bruno Mars, but it's alive and vibrant. It's the whole ethos of rock and roll is supposed to be the other side of the tracks.
Yeah.
There's a reason why it's called pop music, as in popular music. Rock was never meant to be that. Sure, it had its moments at the tippy top, whether it's the British invasion of the 60s or Woodstock era or grunge rock with Nirvana and Pearl Jam. But even those bands would fight. They used to fight like mad, Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder, when they were commercialized. They hated it, because that's not what rock and roll is supposed to be about. It's, again, other side of the tracks. It's the guys and girls on the grassy knoll at lunch, while the preppy kids, with their polos up and their collars up, eating lunch at the cool kids table. That rock and roll is again supposed to be the underdog. So I just don't subscribe to it. I never have, and I never will. Again, it may not be the shiniest light in the room at times, but it's alive and vibrant, and this movie I feel really proves that.
Jonathan, the film shows the community of the hard rock kind of landscape, and it's really interesting. I've been a metalhead ever since I was a teenager, and there's always been kind of like stereotype associated with the music that I listen to, that we listen to. People expect a certain attitude, a certain look, and while that can be, you can find some of that, it's such a diverse kind of range of people who listen to this type of music. And your film shows that you have your dentists and nurses and house mums and prison guards and et cetera, or people from all types of walks of life, all races and sexes and what have you. How important was it to really show that diversity in your movie?
Well, it was very important, but you really clicked on something. You reminded me of something that's important to mention, that there was a study done in Australia. And when you said the word metalheads, it struck me that I found this study, it's published, 2019, about how this music can actually be therapeutic for people, and for troubled youth especially, who can find, who some of whom were bullied for their being, the outcast, if you will. And then all of a sudden they find their tribe, and this tribe is a rock tribe, the people that other rockers, and they dress alike, and they like the same music, and they go to the same shows together. And all of a sudden the bullies who would bully them are now afraid of this new group. And it was really a beautiful study, and I tried to get the educators who wrote it to talk about it during the film, but they weren't able to because of school policy. So Kevin Stopler, who's an adolescent psychologist here in LA, talked about it. And for me, it was one of the most interesting parts of the film, because you get to dive into the psychology of this music a little bit. And, yes, it's, as Gary said, it's not popular. As a matter of fact, some of these people are deep, deep outcasts, and the music can bring them together. And so when you think about, as Miles Kennedy said, his island of lost toys, his fans are all these disparate people that come from all these different places, and they travel and they follow the music because they love it. And, when you think about that, if this music can empower anybody and get them from be turned to be bullied and be ostracized to be part of a club that maybe is not the cool kids jock club, but it's a club nonetheless. And that club, I think, gives people power and there's strength in numbers. And when you go to these festivals, you feel that there's a real strength in numbers here. And that cuts into the segment we did with the song Braveheart. That song by Tom Morello's band, Prophets of Rage, is playing Strength in Numbers. And that really could be a subset of this movie, of how people come together and feel good about this themselves, this music, meeting up with their people. And I think that's really something that I was really glad to get across in this film.
Gary, the film really focuses on a select few metalheads, fans of the music. Now, at any given moment at the festivals that you promote, there's a sea of 1,000 people out there. How do you choose how do you know which people to focus on? Are there certain fans that just show up at these events all the time and you got to know over the years and you're like, one day I'm gonna tell their story on film one day? Is that how you came about in choosing the people in film, especially like, a group like the Party Crew who go from, festival to festival from all around the country and really have created a communion within the communion?
No, it's a great question. And again, if I use the line 100,000 people in Ohio, we could have picked 98,000 different people, because the people that were chosen to deep dive into the fandom with us were really everyday rockers. You got a soccer mom, you got a nurse by day, a trauma nurse by day, and a crowd surfer by night. You got a police officer, you have a convict, you have a dentist and his dentist wife who travel via private helicopter or their plane to.
No, not private helicopter. They rent a single engine jet or double engine
jet. So you got all walks of life, and the common, the commonality that they have together is rock and roll. And it doesn't matter, as John Kasich says in the film, Governor Kasich, if you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, when the music hits you, we're one. And that's so true, because everything's left at when you hand your ticket in to security, your political view, how much money you make, what kind of house you live in, what kind of car you drive, whatever, because everybody's equal at these festivals. So that's the long answer. The short answer is these group of people started a MySpace page.
Wow.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
And they started coming to the shows, and in really loud, like kind of ugly shirts. And they would make these ugly, bright colored shirts for the staff and every year. And they didn't want anything, they weren't asking for, to meet a band, or they're just part of the community. So I'm like, and I love the fact that they didn't want anything or weren't asking for anything or looking for a backstage pass or whatever. So when the time came to film, that's the people I went to, because I thought they were just honest and they were there for the right reasons. They were there for the music.
Jonathan, the film really shows the festival experience, especially like a hard rock metal festival experience. It shows the art of crowd surfing, the majesty of the mosh pits, the splendor of the wall of death. What do you think is about all of these elements? It's really kind of physical kind of part of the whole festival experience. It really speaks to metalheads in particular.
I mean, I was thinking about the other day, and I realized like some of the stuff you see at these festivals is like contact sports. Like the people that love to play football or played football or soccer or rugby or boxing or wrestling. These are deep contact sports in our country. They're a big part of our country, and our people love watching football and all these different sports I mentioned. And all of a sudden you have this music, and the music is so intense that it gets people jacked up. And they feel like they want a contact sport. And here's your opportunity to do that. And then if the ringleader, the guy on stage is going, all right, split the crowd down the middle, you're in. And if you're not into it, you move to the back. Same thing with moshing. Mosh pit breaks out, you either move to the back or jump right in. And it's not for everybody, obviously, but it is an interesting, liberating thing for people. And I think that it's a spectacle to behold. And we put, my camera guy is a rocker, my, editor camera guy. And I put a GoPro on him and I said, you ready to go in the mosh pit? He's like, hell yeah, let's go. And I held his camera and I stood at the edge, and it was just like, you feel that power and that energy. And that's where rock and roll is dangerous, because you can get hurt. You can fall when you're crowd surfing. You could get smacked in the head during the wall of death and get a concussion, right? But people just go for it, man. And I think that it's an outward symbol of passion, rock and roll. Even the concept of banging your head is a more aggressive form of just listening to music, but listening with a deeper passion than most.
Oh, trust me, my neck's still feeling it to this day. Gary, this film has such an impressive lineup of guests in it. I mean, people from Lars Ulrich to Jonathan Davis, Corey Taylor, Jerry Cantrell, Rob Zombie, Zach Wild, and so many more. I mean, it's practically a who's who of rock royalty and rock and roll upcomers as well. What's a process like in getting these kind of rock stars involved in this documentary? Once you tell them about what the documentary is about, and that's about the communion and the spirit of rock and roll and the rock festivals, are they more than eager to jump on board and share their own stories and make their own, give their own thank yous to the fans? Is this in a way them saying thank you to the people who give, time and money to them? And especially, during these days when there's no festival experience at all, I'm sure a lot of these musicians and rock stars appreciate even more what it's like to play in front of thousands of people at any given moment. Yeah,
no, it's a great question. I mean, look, it wasn't too far different than curating a multi-stage, multi-band festival in a sense, because we started at the top.
Yeah,
and we weren't going to shoot this film and do this unless Metallica signed on. And that's starting at the top because they're the king of kings. They're their own genre. I've got so much respect for Metallica, not only the band, but their entire family and the machine, the tank that is Metallica headquarters. They signed on and they said in a very, loving way, you got 20 minutes with Lars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You got 20 minutes. And then we took off from there. The second interview we booked was Chris Cornell of Soundgarden, and that took on its own life form. But then it started flowing in that everybody was on board because what? You're better than Lars, number one. But even more important than that is this was their chance to help wave the flag, to help, this is their moment to shine on a very misunderstood but very beloved genre of music that we know as hard rock and metal. Let's highlight it. Let's celebrate it. Let's spread it to the masses. So it was their chance to speak on behalf of that and to be a part of a film that included Lars and Duff and Tom Morello and these big time rock stars.
Jonathan, what's really impressive to me is that, I've seen so many rock documentaries, especially hard rock documentaries, and you really get behind the humanity behind a rock star. You talk about the struggles, you talk about the excesses and the consequences of those. I think something that really hits home with this documentary, though, is the mortality of the rock and roll lifestyle. During the process of the film, Chester Bennington, Chris Cornell, and Vinnie Paul all passed on. Since then, we've had legends pass on as well, especially in regards to Eddie Van Halen, who passed on the last several months. And the thing that's remarkable about it is that after these moments, the community, the fans, the artists, they all come together in gratitude, in mourning, and in remembrance of all these people. How important was it to really show how even through the toughest of times that this community does come together, does stick together, and reflects and mourns together in a very unique way, as metalheads do.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the whole thing is it's an amazing amalgamation of of celebrating their lives and the chaos that ensues and what happens to them. And, we didn't plan to ever put drugs and alcohol and this aspect in our movie. But as Gary said, we booked Chris Cornell as our second interview. And, the morning we got there and we got the call at 6 a.m. that he was dead. And that, Gary had to struggle to figure out how he was going to program as a headliner gone. It was heavy. So my first question couldn't be to Lars and all these other rock stars, Jacoby Shaddix, like, hey, man, rock and roll is great, isn't it? It had to be, talk to me about your feelings about where you're feeling that right now about Chris. And so we had that footage, and we still were, making another movie. We're making a movie celebrating this rock culture and trying to stay away from the stuff that's not up-tempo, good, happy stuff, which is death and drugs and opioid addiction. And then we made plans. Luckily, Gary got us Duff from Guns N' Roses. It was an amazing interview. But even he talked about his almost near-death experience by, his pancreas exploding by drugs and alcohol. So you have him talking about that. Okay, well, we're still probably not going to use that. And then the next thing we line up is Chester Bennington, who also dies. So now it's like, okay, you really, the signpost is leading that you have to include a segment of in this film. And then even the female rock star like Dorothy, we had a great interview with her at one festival. And then Gary runs into her, 6 months, a year later at another festival. And she's like, oh, yeah, I don't really remember that. I was drinking heavily back then, but I'm sober now. And so she came back and we started talking about sobriety. And I happen to have my best friend in the world I grew up with has been struggling immensely for over a decade now. And it was particularly bad for me at that moment because he was torturing me because he gets crazy. And we started talking about it. We both started crying in this interview. And it was like, you got to go there. You know what I mean? It's like you don't want to go there, but it's so important. And there's so much of it out there. And then, the party cruise leader, G's wife, tells us that she lost 2 brothers and her mother from between opioids and heroin. Like, that's insane. One family in Ohio. So anyway, that we basically had to go there and made this part of our film. And I'm really glad we did because it touches a lot of people.
Yeah.
It may be a buzzkill, but you know what? You gotta talk about the important stuff.
Gary, COVID has decimated a lot of different industries all around the world. I think one of the most impacted definitely has to be the live music scene. We started off talking about Gene Simmons saying rock is dead. And I want to end it with Alice Cooper with a recent quote that he had. Where he said he totally expects a hard rock resurgence post what we're going through now with lockdown and everything. What do you see out there? What is your feeling? You yourself are a festival promoter. You're deep in that industry. I know a lot of bands are chomping at the bit to get out there. What do you foresee is going to happen post, say, end of 2022, maybe even your summer, in regards to touring, in regards to concerts? Are we ready for a resurgence for hard rock?
Hey, Alice Cooper just had a #1 record. Number one,
yeah, right?
Reckless. Had a #1 rock record. Pretty Reckless to Alice Cooper. It's going to be the Roaring '20s. I'm very bullish. When the clouds part and the floodgates open, people have a real hunger and appetite for live, shoulder to shoulder and big old mass gatherings and rock and roll parties. But it's not today and it's not next week. So back to www.longliverockmovie.com. This movie really could hopefully help ease your pain while you're waiting for those floodgates to open. This movie gets you going, and it shows the chaos and the excitement and the energy of what a great rock show, a live show is.
It certainly does. So for everyone out there listening, Long Live Rock releases 12th of March. You can go to longliverockmovie.com and there you can find out tickets. You can merch, there's trailers, there's all sorts of stuff there. There's also a really cool Facebook page as well, Long Live Rock Movie. It's got a lot of details there as well. And Jonathan and Gary, just want to congratulate you both for your documentary. I think, Gary, as you touched on at the end, this is definitely the documentary we need right now. It's part, I think I heard you say in previous interviews, it's kind of like this is part of the relief package that I'm come forth now. I think a lot of people are really chomping at the bit to watch hard rock acts. I know a lot of hard rock acts really can't wait to play in front of fans again. But until that time, we have this documentary and it's a great one. So I thank you both very much for your time and congratulations with the movie.
Thanks for having us, Matt. It's really great.
Matt, good interview. Thank you you really kept it flowing. And
Matt's done this before. He's done 1 or 2 interviews in.